In the poem titled For Whom the Bell Tolls by John Donne, Donne demonstrates the connection all humans have with each other and their interdependence for each other to survive. In this poem, the poet suggests that death diminishes all and humans depend on others to stay alive. Donne tells us that interdependence between humans keeps us alive. At the beginning of the poem, he states that no man is an island entire of itself. He is showing that there is an interconnectedness between all humans and that we cannot stand alone, apart from each other, but instead we stand together as one whole. He goes on to illustrate more on how we are all a part of that one whole, and when someone of that one whole dies, a little bit of everyone dies, and the whole is now smaller and weaker. No matter whom the person is, or whatever they do, all humans are independent on one another. He mostly shows this last point when he says, "It tolls for thee." What he is referring to when he says tolls in the last two lines are church bells, the signal of a man's death, thus weakening the whole. There is no rhyme scheme or standard meter to this poem, as originally it was not intended to be a poem, only a passage in writing by John Donne. Donne has beautifully added many examples of figurative language within this poem. He uses metaphors, similes, allusions, repetition, alliterations, and other things he likes to play with in order to add more meaning to his poem. Diction and imagery are pulled into play when he uses his metaphors and similes. In the first 4 lines of his poems, Donne writes, "No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main." This is a metaphor comparing a man to a piece of a continent. Also, Donne writes, "If a clod be washed away by the sea, Europe is the less, as well as if a promontory were, as well as if a manor of thy friends, or if thine own were." This is a simile comparing a clod of land being washed away by the sea to an individual's death. Both of these uses of figurative language help put a picture in your mind and further stress the motif of interdependence throughout the poem. Also, to add on to imagery and diction, Donne writes of tolling of the bells, which is an allusion to show church bells ringing of someone's death. To add to the gloomy yet somewhat strong tone and mood of the poem, Donne uses figurative language such as repetition and alliterations, and he also plays with things like line length, word choice, and sounds to help set the tone and mood of the poem. For repetition, at the beginning of the lines 7 and 8, Donne repeats the words, "as well as if a." He says this when he is emphasizing how when one man dies, a little bit of all of us die, and how the whole becomes weaker. Repeating that shows that it doesn't matter who has died because all humans are interdependent, and one human's death changes us all. For the alliteration, Donne writes, "Death diminishes." This sets the gloomy tone more than anything, and it also draws attention to the poem's theme that all people are connected, and when one suffers, all suffer. Donne plays with the line length, sounds, and word choice in this poem, specifically in the last line, and it sets the tone of the poem tremendously well. The short final line of the poem emphasizes the poem's message and theme that when one dies, a part of everyone dies. The word choice Donne uses in the last line makes the last line short and harsh, and is used primarily to emphasize the line and the message he is trying to convey. He uses a harsh T sound that contrasts with the soft rolling W and L sounds of the line before that. He even goes into more emphasis on the last word of the poem, taking you from a soft, long O in tolls to a harsh, long E. For connotation and denotation of the poem, Donne uses words such as tolls, bell, island, and continent. Both bell and tolls are used literally in the sense that the bell rings, but the words are used together to show church bells ringing for a man's death. The use of this connotation of these two words is emphasizing the main theme of the poem. Island and continent are also used literally in the sense that they are one body of land and that there are many parts to them, but Donne uses these bodies of land and their many parts to them and compares them to humans and the interdependence of one another to survive.
Similarly to the poem For Whom the Bell Tolls, in the poem titled Alone by Maya Angelou, Angelou demonstrates the connection all humans have with each other and their interdependence for each other to survive. In this poem, the poet suggests that you can try to make it through life alone, but you will always need someone to help you through it. And it also hints at how when people die, in a sense, all of mankind is hurt, similar to Donne's poem.
Alone starts off with the speaker feeling isolated, soul-searching in order to find an answer to her problems. She finds that she needs people in the community to get by. She then goes on to use a few Bible references, which is similar to the church bells in Donne's poem. She states that money can't buy happiness, and being rich is a poor way to live. If you live this poor way of being alone, humanity suffers, and since all people are interdependent, whoever is alone will suffer the most. Over and over, she stresses the idea that nobody can make it out here alone, which also relates to the motif of interdependence and the theme. This poem can also be interpreted in a different way related more to Donne's poem. Angelou says, "Where the water is not thirsty and the bread is not stone," which could be similar to the perfect whole nation described in For Whom the Bell Tolls, and the deaths in For Whom the Bell Tolls could be similar to how Angelou says, "To cure their hearts of stone," and "The race of man is suffering, and I can hear them moan." Also similar to For Whom the Bell Tolls, Alone has no real rhyme scheme or standard meter. In this poem, Angelou also used many forms of figurative language, also many of them being similar to figurative language used in Donne's poem. She uses certain phrases in the poem to show imagery and to emphasize the theme of the poem. One very good example in which she does this is when she says, "Storm clouds are gathering, the wind is gonna blow." This shows how mankind is falling apart because everyone is going through life alone instead of being one big working whole. All of the figurative language that she included was used to set the tone and mood of the poem. Throughout the poem, she used the same figurative language Donne used, which was similes, metaphors, alliterations, allusions, and repetition. An example in which she uses a simile is when she says, "Their wives run around like banshees." She is saying that the millionaires who try to buy happiness are going through life alone and, in a sense, dying and going crazy. This so-called dying adds to the tone of sadness throughout the poem. An example of a metaphor is when she compares the millionaires' hearts to stone. This is showing that they have no compassion for the other people in the world and that they are only caring about themselves, therefore hurting the greater society. This could also be taken in a way as since their hearts are now made of stone, they are dying and taking away from the whole of human interdependence. Just as in For Whom the Bell Tolls, Alone has an allusion to Christianity. The allusion is when she said, "Where water is not thirsty and bread loaf is not stone." In the Bible, Satan was trying to tempt Jesus to turn rocks into bread, but Jesus didn't fall for it. She is saying in this world we are being corrupted by separating ourselves from one another. This also adds to the tone of sadness and aloneness in the poem. Repetition and alliteration are also used throughout the poem in the same lines many times. After every stanza she says, "Alone, all alone. Nobody but nobody can make it out here alone." The repetition of alone and nobody for alliterations, along with the rest of the lines, forces the tone of sadness and aloneness into your head, and it also emphasizes the theme that we are all connected, and when one suffers, all suffer, and the motif of interdependence. Lastly, Angelou manipulates the connotation and denotation of words such as moan, wind, clouds, and stone. Moan is used in the literal sense of mankind is moaning because they are suffering when there is a connotation of death and interdependence. In Alone, wind and clouds are used in the usual way in which they are used. Also, these words are used to portray the faults of mankind building up and the tearing apart of the whole. Also, Angelou uses the word stone to describe things like hearts. There's a denotation of being solid and alone, but there's an overall connotation of being cold and faulted.